Hello again, and what is hip? Unfortunately, that intro did stick, because I couldn't think of anything better, believe it or not. But welcome back to another video, and I'm very excited for this one, since I get to talk about the Sega Saturn, which is one of my favorite systems of all time, and really half the inspiration to my YouTube username, the 32-bit musician. So a little preface here. I got into the Sega Saturn at a very young age. I was in elementary school, and I was watching videos by the likes of Classic Game Room and GameSack and all of those guys, the OGs. And every once in a while, they'd post a video about the Sega Saturn. And I remember watching it and being mesmerized because it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was more rudimentary than the Nintendo 64, but more advanced than the Super Nintendo, a weird in-between that I was not used to. And at the time, I was very much a Nintendo-focused gamer. I had all the Nintendo systems at the time, and I think I had maybe a Sega Genesis. I can't quite remember, but I wasn't really well-versed in companies outside of Nintendo at the time. And so I was watching these videos on the Sega Saturn, and all these games were like styles of games and music and all of this that I haven't seen before on the 64. Very unique looking games. And so that really got me hooked, and I remember being on a mission to find the Sega Saturn as a kid. And as many of you probably know, finding anything Sega Saturn in the wild, even at gaming conventions, is very hard, since it did not sell well. And I remember going to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo many years ago, and I found I was going specifically to find a Sega Saturn, and I did find it. I found a complete in-box launch edition of the Sega Saturn that came bundled with a game. And I remember going up to the seller, and I think he had it for $60, maybe a little more. And I was like, I can't afford that. You know, I'm a kid, but I really am interested in it. And he actually ended up giving me a very good deal. I think I got it for $40. And I think it was because I was so young, but I expressed such an interest in the system. And that was really nice of him, because that jump-started my Sega Saturn collection. And I'm still collecting to this day. So the first game we're going to start out with in my collection here is that bundled game, Virtua Fighter for the Sega Saturn. Now, this game received so much backlash back in the day because it was a very rushed port, and it was choppy, the graphics weren't very good. It was so bad that it got Sega to remake this game. It was called Virtua Fighter Remix on the Sega Saturn, and I think you could send in your original copies of this game and get the new remix version. Now, when I got my copy, or my original Sega Saturn, it came with everything except for this game. And I was on the lookout for this game for many years. I could never find it, because it's a harder to find game because of the fact that it was so bad and Sega stopped making it very early on. But it wasn't until early this year at a local game store that I found this copy, and I picked it up immediately. And it's just so cool thinking that 10 plus years later, I found the game that I was missing in my original Sega Saturn bundle. So it was so cool, and one of the things that really kind of keeps me collecting. Now, the next game here is a little game known by many as one of the best racers of all time, one of the best arcade racers, and that's Daytona USA. Now, as many of you know, and for those of you who don't know, Sega Saturn collecting is very expensive now. It's extremely unfortunate that it's gotten to this point, but a lot of the games on this system have not been ported. And one of the reasons why I fell in love with this system was that the games were so unique, and you don't really see many games like this on other systems. Other people see that too, and that's why this system has jumped in price. But this is a game that you can actually get very cheap nowadays for under $10. And this is a launch game for the system, and it's a lot of fun. It's an arcade port of the Daytona USA, and the music is great. There is an awesome 90s track in here where he goes, Daytona, let's go away. super cheesy, but it's one of the reasons why I love this game. It's just a cheese fest. But the content in this game is very light. There's only, I think, 3 tracks in the whole game, and there's only a couple of cars that you can choose from. So it's extremely content light, but the content that is there is so much fun, and the replayability is extremely high. So if you're just getting into Sega Saturn collecting, this is a great game to really start out on. However, if you have $20 or so more to spend, I would highly recommend not getting this and getting Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition. Now this is basically a revised version of the original Daytona USA. Kind of like Virtua Fighter Remix. The graphics are a little better, it runs a little better, but this game has extra courses, extra cars, and it's the definitive way to play this game, and it's still fairly affordable, which you can't say for many good Sega Saturn games. You can get it for around $40. And that's what I got mine for. And this is the game to get of the two, if you can afford the extra $20 or so. So much fun, a lot more content, still relatively content light with only 5 tracks, but this is a great game, great music. Highly recommend, a must own for the Sega Saturn system. Now, keeping on with the racing tradition, this is Sega Rally Championship for the Sega Saturn, and this is a game that I wanted ever since I first started getting into the Sega Saturn. In fact, I think it was Classic Game Room's video on Sega Rally that really got me into the Sega Saturn. This is one of the first Sega Saturn games I saw, and this game is fun. This is definitely more arcadey than the Daytona USA, but in my opinion, it's a little more accessible. The controls in Daytona USA can be kind of hard, but I love the arcade feeling in this game, and it's just so much fun. The music is great, not as good as Daytona USA, but it's still very good. Of the two, I would lean more towards Sega Rally. However, this is more content light than Sega Rally Championship Edition. I think there's 4 courses in here, so a little less content. Music's not quite as good. I think the graphics are still very good, and the gameplay is so much fun. I put many hours into this game. Highly recommend. Now, the last racing game I have here is also a game that I've wanted for a very long time. One of the original games that I wanted, but I never got it because it was always just a little too expensive for me. But that game is High Velocity for the Sega Saturn, and this game is an extremely underrated racing game. As you can see right here, the publisher is actually Atlas, which is kind of cool. The creator, or the publisher of the Shin Megami Tensei series, the Persona series, and all of them. This game here, back in the day, you could usually get it for around $20 or so, 10 years ago or so. And that was always just a little too much for me. I didn't want to spend that. And I was a kid and I didn't have as much spending money. But I really wish I would have picked it up, because I went to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo Swap Meet, which is their smaller secondary event that they usually put on in January. And I was looking for games, and I was looking specifically for Sega Saturn games, which is hard enough as it is. But I went and I found High Velocity on the Sega Saturn. This was one of the games I was looking for. And I saw the price, and it was $90. And I was like, there was no way that this game goes for that much now. Sure enough, it does. $90, $100 plus. So I was like, I can't do that. So I came back the next day and it was still there, and I talked them down to $45, which is a steal, relatively speaking, compared to what it's worth now, but still more than what I wanted to spend originally, and more than I wanted to spend at that moment, because I thought it was a $30 game. But it's a very expensive game now, unfortunately, but it's a lot of fun. The graphics are great, relatively content light, but the racing mechanics feel so good in this game. So if you can find this for a decent price, highly recommend. And it's an Atlas title, so knowing that, there's a high chance that it's only going to go up in price. So that's it for the racing games. Another game here is a game that I got very early on in my Sega Saturn collecting journey, and that's Doom for the Sega Saturn. I'm not a big Doom fan, I know, but I appreciate the game for what it is and what it's done for video gaming in general. But this game I got at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. You'll find that's a very common theme throughout this video. But I got this many years ago. I got it for $8, which was a good deal back then. I think it was a $20, $30 game at the time. Now this is like $100. It's not worth the price of admission. You can get it many other places for much cheaper. But for the ports of this game back then, this was one of the best. Runs very well. It looks great. The controls are it doesn't compare to mouse and keyboard, but they're fine. But it's a very good game. I've played some of it. Not my cup of tea. I'm not into Quake or Doom too much, but if you can find it for cheap, definitely pick it up. Now, this game, in my opinion, is a must-own on the system. This is Virtual On for the Sega Saturn. This game is so much fun. So this is a port of an arcade game that was originally released in Japan, and what it is a 3D fighter. But so you're in a battle arena, and you're fighting using mechs. I mean, that's how awesome is that? With a killer soundtrack and great graphics, and you can use the 3D control pad with this as well. And it's for 1 or 2 players. So this is a lot of fun. There's a learning curve to it, but if you can get past that, it's very addicting and very replayable. In Japan, they released a specific controller for this game. It was like almost a dual yoke flight stick kind of thing that you could use to play this game. So I don't have, that'd be super cool. But you can get this game for relatively cheap. I think it's under $50, and it's a must-own for that price. There's not too many Sega Saturn games that are really good and not expensive. Relatively expensive anyway. So if you can find this, please pick it up. And this game I have here, I have Virtual On twice. This is my second copy of Virtual On. This is actually my original copy that I got many years back. I picked up this copy within the past several years, and the reason why is because my original copy is sealed. So that's pretty cool. This is one of the more unique items in my collection, my only Sega Saturn game that's sealed. I got this for like $30 back in the day, and you can see the little Sears price tag sticker there, which is super cool. But I have no idea how much this is worth, but I collected because I thought the games were fun and I thought they were cool. I didn't collect because they were worth anything, and back then they really weren't worth anything, and that's when I got the majority of my games. You know, they were cheap, relatively speaking, and easier to come by, so they weren't in demand as much. There wasn't so much I'm buying to invest mindset, which I really miss, and I wish that was still around. It is definitely still around, but it's being diluted with the investing mindset, which is really unfortunate. But anyways, highly recommend Virtual On. That is on my list of must-have games. Now, another game on my list of must-have games is a little more expensive now, but It's also been ported to or remade on many modern systems. However, the remake doesn't really hold a candle to the original Sega Saturn version, and that is Panzer Dragoon. This game is so much fun. It's beautiful. The soundtrack is amazing. It's a rail shooter, an on-rail shooter, and you go around riding your dragon, and you're shooting enemies alongside a fantastic soundtrack. And this game really takes you on a magical journey. It's so much fun. And there was a sequel called Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but apparently that game's actually better. But it's more expensive. It's in the mid hundreds. This game you can get for around $80 last I checked. I got this 10 years ago for like $30, or maybe actually less than that. So they're going up in price. But if you want to play it cheap, you can play the remake for around $5. It's always on sale for under $5. And it's a good remake. Just not as good as the original. Very good. If you can find this for an affordable price, definitely pick it up. Now, this game, in my opinion, is the most underrated Sonic game of all time. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying that, but I love this game. That's Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Saturn. This game is amazing. I first found out about this game on the Sonic Mega Collection for the GameCube, and the version that was on there was the Genesis version. And the Genesis and Saturn version came out around the same time, I believe. The Saturn version is far superior. The music is amazing in this version. The graphics are much better. And there are special 3D special stages in the Saturn version that are not in the original Genesis version. But this game is a lot of fun. It's, not a platformer. It's kind of a collectathon where you're going around saving these flickies, and that's how you complete the level, by saving all the flickies. So it's not your typical Sonic game, and it's definitely an acquired taste. However, I think if you give it a chance and really just kind of bask in the music and the vibe that it sets up, I think you'll really learn to love it. And the Saturn version is definitely the way to go. And it's still relatively cheap. I think it's $60-ish. It could be more, could be less. But highly recommend. Now, this game is probably one of the most meaningful games in my collection in general. And that is Christmas Nights into Dreams. What can I say about this game? So, this game is a demo. It was released as a demo, and it was released in America through Sega of America's gaming magazine. It was a free add-on sampler demo that demoed their Nights into Dreams video game. But what makes this demo so unique is that they Christmasified it. So they changed the levels to winter themes, and they changed the music, and there's even a little story in here, which is really cool. But it's like the most full-length game demo I've ever experienced, and the music is so good. I would listen to this soundtrack on YouTube as a kid, and there was this one song in particular that was really amazing. I think it was the credits song, the song that rolled during the credits, and I listened to that over and over. And the crazy thing is that years later, when I went to college in New York, I was going for jazz voice. I'm a jazz vocalist, and one of my private teachers, I found out that he was the guy who sang the song in the credits on Christmas Nights into Dreams. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And I brought that up to him, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, how do you know about that?" And he told me about his time in the recording studio and how Sega of Japan invited him out, and they were really wonderful. But I mean, that was that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. You know, growing up with this game and meeting the person who sang the song that I love. And I got this copy off eBay. This is not the case it came in. This is a fan-made case. But inside is the original cardboard sleeve that it came in. You can see they cut it up and put it here, which I think is actually a really cool idea. And there's the game there. But this game is relatively hard to find. So it's more on the expensive side, at least to find the English version, since it was only released via magazines. But you can find, I think they did a standalone release in Japan that you can get in a jewel case for much, much cheaper. So I picked this up. It's so much fun. I play it every year, every Christmas. I'm going to be playing it this year as well. In fact, I want to hook my Sega Saturn up right now and start playing it. So that leads us into the original Nights into Dreams. This is also one of the must-have games on the Sega Saturn. And this one here is the version that came bundled with the 3D control pad. So it comes with this box, and I picked this up many, many years ago at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. And a funny story about this was that it's a 2-day event, the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, Saturday and Sunday. And I showed up on Saturday and I saw a vendor had this, and I was like, I think they had it for $60 or $70, and it was a little much for me at the time. I think it was on the higher end of what it was worth at the time. So I was like, can you work with me on the price? And they were like, no. And I kept showing up throughout the day on Saturday. They're like, no. And they're like, maybe if it's still here tomorrow on Sunday, come by. So I did that. I showed up on Sunday in the morning. They're like, no. And I showed up throughout all of Sunday. And then at the very end, they were finally willing to work with me as they were closing down shop. So I did get a little bit of a deal. The control pad's brand new. It's never been used, which is super cool. But what is there to say about Nights into Dreams? It's such a unique game. It's made by Sonic Team, and I think this is actually Sonic Team's first video game. And Nights was made by the creator of Sonic, so this is his child, and it's magical. It's unique. There's nothing else like it. I think you can get Nights into Dreams around $60-ish on the Saturn. Just the game, not the big box. But you can also, it's been ported to many other systems as well, and you can get it for much cheaper. So play it whatever way you can. It's a great game. Okay. Now before we get into some of the heavy hitters, this is probably the worst game I have on the Saturn, and one of the worst games I've ever played. This is Cyber Speedway for the Saturn. This game I paid maybe $2 for back in the day, and you can still get it for under $5. It's a bad game. Bad. It's some racing game set in space, and the controls are bad, the graphics are bad. The music's actually pretty good. It's by Bygone Dogs, which I think they're an 80s, 90s rock metal band. So that's pretty cool. But this is just a bad game. I bought it because I was looking for Saturn games that were affordable, and I saw this and I was like, oh, it's pretty cheap. Well, it was cheap for a reason. Avoid this game. Now we're gonna get into some of the heavy hitters, and before we get into those, I'll tell you how I own some of these, because as you know, Saturn collecting is very expensive. A lot of these games I got many years ago, so they were cheaper back then, or I would specifically go out and buy beat up copies that were in bad condition, but still relatively complete, or maybe not, and I got a better deal on them. But just to have them in the collection and to play them, because a lot of these games have not been ported. So the first game is a game I wanted for a very long time, and I finally got around to picking it up last year. This is a stall on the Sega Saturn, and as you can see, mine's missing the manual here, but this game is beautiful. beautiful 2D platformer with wonderfully animated 2D sprites. And this is so unique. I don't think it's been ported to anything. I think it's only on the Saturn. And it stayed around the same price. I remember this game being a $60 to $80 game 5+ years ago, and I think it's still around that price. I got this one for $45 at the Retro Gaming Expo swap meet, and it's missing the manual and the disc was pretty scratched, but I played this and it's a lot of fun. It's pretty hard. It's very unique too, and it almost reminds me slightly of Klonoa, a 2D version of Klonoa. But if you can find this for a relatively affordable price, pick it up. I think it's an experience that you won't forget. It's so much fun, and you won't find this on any other system, to my knowledge. Now, this next game is exciting. This is the first big name game I got on the Saturn when I was very young, and I would go as far to say that this is the one game I think if you were to spend a little bit of money on, I think it should be this game. This is Shining the Holy Ark. This is an RPG for the Saturn. It's a dungeon crawler with a town system, and there's a little overworld map. And this game goes for, I want to say, around $140-ish or so. I got this back 8 or 10 years ago for $40, and that was a lot of money. I thought that was a lot of money back then. That was one of the only items I got at the expo. I got this, and I got Virtual Fighter, or Virtualon at the same expo, and those were the only two games I got, because that made me broke after that. But this game is a lot of fun. It's a very almost eerie presentation. It's I don't know if it's intentionally trying to be dark, or if just the art style and everything makes it so dark. But the sprite work I'm not a big fan of. It's like this weird pseudo 3D sprite work, and I think it just makes the characters look kind of creepy. I remember there was one part of the game, and it was not related to the main story at all. I was just walking around and talking to side NPCs, and it was a little kid, and all of a sudden, I was talking to the kid, and his face starts bubbling, and then he just implodes and disappears, and it was creepy. I was just sitting there, and I was like, what is this? But this is a lot of fun. It's a very hard game, but the story's good, the music's good, the characters are fun, and it's probably the most, if not one of the most affordable RPGs on the system. That's, in my opinion, it's one of the best ones on the system by far. And the next one we talk about, the next game, is also one of those cheaper RPGs, but nowhere near as good as this. So if you can find this, pick it up. I don't believe it's been ported. Great game. So that game I was talking about was Shining Wisdom. Now, this game has gone up a little more in price. I think it's actually more expensive than Shining the Holy Ark, but as you can see, my copy is very beat up. That's because I didn't want to spend a lot of money on this game, but I still wanted to own it. So the case is beat up, it's missing the manual, the actual disc is kind of scratched. This game, I don't think it's very good. The music is, the art style I think is hideous. It's a Zelda, it's almost like a Zelda type clone, but it's not very good. I feel it's uninspired. Granted, I haven't played that long, maybe an hour, but I could not get into it. And I would skip this one. I wouldn't spend the money on it since it's getting up there in price. But also hasn't been ported to my knowledge. So if you want to play it, the Saturn is the place to do it. Now, here's another subpar RPG. This is Mysteria, The Realms of Lore. Now, this game I think goes for about $100. It's a tactical RPG, and the Saturn had actually quite a few of those. This is by far the worst in my opinion. The graphics they're okay, they're not great. The music's not really good, the characters are not good, the story's boring. It's very subpar, and I actually think that they've released this game twice and it goes by a different name as well. They changed the name halfway through the lifespan of the system, I believe, which is kind of interesting. But the reason why I bought this was this was at the Portland Retro Swap Meet. This is a rental case for Sega Saturn, and I have never seen a Sega Saturn rental game before. And I thought that was so cool. This is Schnucks Video Club. Schnucks. I've never heard of Schnucks. But it actually has the original manual up front, except the inside pages were torn out, so they just have the cover. And this is the original back case art as well. And you open it up there, and there's the case and the game, and be kind, please rewind, because you gotta rewind after you play your Sega Saturn disc game, even though you probably wouldn't get far enough to rewind in this game. But I thought this was really cool. This is actually one of my favorite pieces in my collection, since I've never seen a Sega Saturn rental case before. So that was really cool, and I got it for $40. So I thought it was a good deal. Maybe it wasn't, but super cool nonetheless. Now, getting to the last two games here. This game is Dragon Force for the Sega Saturn, and this is another tactical RPG, but this is far superior than the Mysteria game. This game, I think it's around $200 or so it's up there in price, but I think it's worth it. I would say it's worth it if you're into tactical RPGs. They're beautiful anime cutscenes in here. The music's great. The sprite work is fantastic. It's a very in-depth game. There's a learning curve. There's a very steep learning curve. You're probably going to have to watch some videos and tutorials and read the manual on how to play. I still don't know how to play, and I've read the manual and watched some videos. It's very complicated, but it's so in-depth, and there's so much content here. There are 7 different playable characters, I believe, maybe one more, and each one has their own story, and each story is like 20-30 hours plus. So there is over 100 hours worth of content in this game if you want to be complete. And for $200, it's a pretty penny, but I think it's worth the price. I would say it's worth the price. This is a game I still want to go back to and really just learn how to play it, so I can play it. But if you are even the slightest bit into tactical RPGs, definitely look into this one if you can. Now, the next game here, the last game, is another tactical RPG, and it's probably, people consider this one to be the best tactical RPG or one of the best tactical RPGs on the system. It's usually a toss-up between Dragon Force and this next game here. But this game is very expensive now. It's like $400. I did not pay anywhere near that price. This is Shining Force 3. What is there to say about this game? This game really is wonderful, and there's a reason why it costs so much. This is a grand RPG adventure. The graphics are beautiful. The music's amazing. This is 3D oriented, while Dragon Force was 3D backdrops, but most of it was 2D. This one has 3D animated scenes and all of that. So it was actually very technically impressive for the system. The writing is hilarious. The writing is so good. I think this game is actually developed by Camelot, or the name's slipping my tongue, but it's really, really wonderful. The story is really good. The graphics are great. That's all there is to really say. I haven't played too much of this game, but this is a game I want to delve into for sure. And unfortunately, you know, this game is expensive for a reason. It's really good. It's actually part 1 of a trilogy. The other 2 games were not released in America. This is the only one that was released and localized here. The other ones were released in Japan, so this is part 1. So you play through this, and you know, you won't know the rest of the story, because we never got the rest of the story, which is really unfortunate. But pick this up if you can find it for a good price, or if you can afford it, or emulate it. It's a fantastic game. I don't think it's available on any other system, and it's just highly recommended for sure. So that's it, you guys. That's my Sega Saturn collection there. It's not the biggest, but I'm really happy with what I have, and you know, when I look back at my Sega Saturn collection, I'm also looking back at really a whole bunch of memories and my adventure collecting all these games since I was young. This spans back to elementary school, which is really cool. This is over a decade's worth of collecting right here, and that's how big it is. So I mean, that goes to show how hard it is to really collect for this system, unfortunately. But this system has been probably the most fun to collect for, since it has been so hard. So whenever you find that gem, it really hits you differently. But thank you so much, guys, for sitting down and watching me geek out about this. I love the Sega Saturn. It means a lot to me. So what are some of your guys' favorite Sega Saturn games, or what was your guys' first gaming system that really kind of intrigued you? I would love to know. So hit me up in the comments and let's have a discussion. But thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.